Yeah, Harry, well, it's been about 4 or 5 weeks since FaceAgg decided to discontinue the original Oculus Rift and replace it with the Rift S. And if you were thinking about pulling the trigger on the original Rift, but you never quite got around to it, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you've dodged a bit of a bullet there, because you would have ended up with a discontinued and obsolete device now, where everyone else is running around with their Rift S on their heads. So what do you do if you're still in the market for a VR headset in the $400 to $500 price range and you want PC tethered as well? Well, you've got two options. You've got the revised Oculus Rift S second generation VR headset, or you have the original OG HTC Vive. So which one do you go for? Which one is best? You might have heard a few negative things about the Oculus Rift S, but it's cheaper at $400. Is it worth the compromise? Is second generation worth those compromises? Or is the HTC Vive the safe bet because it's been around for a while? And when I say a while, it is actually 3 years old now. Is that too old? Is first generation able to light a candle to second generation? Or is the fact that it's 3 years old a good thing because it's had 3 years worth of software updates, it's polished and it's slick and well supported at this point? What do you do? Which one do you go for? Which one is best? Well, I'm going to look at that in this video. I'm going to compare these head to head, give you some pros and cons for either or, and then at the end just tell you which one I'd buy if I was to buy them all over again. Right, well, we're going to start with build quality, and the build quality on the HTC Vive is absolutely top notch. It is by far the better of the two. The Vive feels more premium, it feels like it's built of better materials, it feels solid, and if you like your products to feel as expensive as they were, then the Vive triumphs here. Mine's 3 years old, it's never missed a beat in 3 years under heavy usage as well. It's been flawless, it's completely unmarked as well. And it can't be faulted at all. The Oculus Rift S, on the other hand, there's been a few regressions with the Oculus Rift since the first generation, and the build quality is definitely one of them. I don't know if this has anything to do with the contribution of Lenovo or not. Nobody really knows what they did with regards to the build of this device, but the build quality is not very good on the Oculus Rift S, shall we say, and it's mostly surrounding the Halo headband as well. It doesn't feel very well put together at all. It feels loose, it feels like there's too much give in it, there's too much slack, it rattles, it's cheap, flimsy and weak. It does not feel like this headband is going to last more than a year underneath heavy usage. I can imagine there'll be a lot of people with broken headbands on the Oculus Rift S. But overall, I think the main body of the headset is fine. It looks okay. It feels okay. It's mostly the headband that lets it down. But overall, I wouldn't say it's a poor quality product. It just doesn't feel like it's $400 worth of a tech product. In terms of comfort, neither of them, as far as clamping something to your head goes, neither of them really feel that uncomfortable. The HTC Vive feels the heavier of the two, although I think they're pretty much identical in terms of weight, but a lot of the weight in the HTC Vive is towards the front of the device in this region here, which makes it feel like you've got a bit of sag on the headset whilst you're wearing it. But it certainly doesn't feel uncomfortable when you're wearing it for long periods of time. But yeah, this one doesn't do such a good job of weight distribution. The Rift S, on the other hand, it does feel lighter, but I think that's just because it distributes the weight over the full device rather than it all being front loaded. The headband, as cheap as it does feel, it is well padded around the back and the front region. The face pad on the front of the Oculus Rift S is fine once it's clamped to your head. As long as you get a good seal, this one does feel the more comfortable of the two devices, but neither of them are uncomfortable. If you're giving this to somebody else to use and they don't get a very good seal on the device, there is an exposed plastic region on the bottom of the Rift around the nose region which can rub against someone's face, which is very uncomfortable. But apart from that, if it's your device and you're well used to putting it on your head, you're going to find that this one is the more comfortable of the two. In terms of connectivity, this one doesn't really matter, but some people might find it's a thing. With the HTC Vive, there's more of a setup process involved. It comes with more peripherals, more things requiring wall sockets and placed near wall sockets. The headset itself has 3 cables, power, USB and HDMI, which go into a link box. The link box needs to be cabled into your PC. It's just more involved of a setup, which for me personally isn't a problem. However, the Oculus Rift S, on the other hand, if you're not all that confident with setting up tech products, the Oculus Rift S simply has 2 ports. That's it, and they go straight into your PC. There's a display port and a USB 3 port, and that's it. No external boxes, no external wall mounted fittings, nothing. 2 cables into your PC and you're good to go. So whilst I'm okay with the Vive having more of an involved setup, I think most people are probably going to appreciate the simplicity of the Oculus Rift S in terms of setup. Once you've got it all set up, there's the software that you've got to fight with, and I don't want to dwell on software too much, but the HTC Vive, which is built around Steam VR, is the slicker of the two. Steam VR at this point is well optimized, it's streamlined, it's lightweight, it's easy to install and set up, and it's just well optimized. It works flawlessly. It's had 3 years worth of software updates, and I found that there's very few, if any, issues really with Steam VR. The Oculus Rift, on the other hand, well, face sake, they don't like you to use your Oculus Rift S soon after buying it, because the Great Book of Face expects you to download 10 gig worth of Oculus Home software before you can use your Rift S, which can be a problem for people on metered connections or slow connections. But once you've got the Oculus Home software installed, most people do install Steam VR on the same PC as the Oculus Home software, and the two VR management programs have got conflicting settings which can contradict each other, and that can be an issue. There's also some niggly issues with the Rift S at the moment which aren't unique to me. The Rift S tends to forget the play space area on a regular basis. It keeps resetting that, which is very frustrating. You get regular black screens in the device which needs to be unplugged and plugged back in. It's just frustrating. It's not as slick as the HTC Vive, but I would imagine a lot of those issues will get ironed out over time. Right, a big part of any VR system is the tracking system, and most people won't give a toot about the tracking system, but it does need to be mentioned. But in an ideal world, most people will just use the VR headsets and not really know what tracking it is. As long as it just works, you won't be able to tell the difference. But the Rift S, because this is second generation, it's went away from external tracking sensors, and it now uses an inside-out tracking system, and it's called Oculus Insight. So it has 5 cameras on the headset, 2 on the front, 1 on the top, and then 1 on each side. And the way this works is that the cameras scan up out from the headset and then scan the surrounding environment, and then it determines the headset's location with respect to the surrounding space. There's a couple of downsides of this, some potentially big deal breakers actually, and that is because the cameras need to see the outside space. You can't use this in a dark room. If it's pitch black, this just simply will not track because the cameras need to see. That could be a deal breaker for a lot of people. Also, because the cameras are front facing, they point outwards, upwards and sideways. If your hands, which are the touch controllers, go behind your back, the tracking sensors can struggle to pick up on those, but generally that's quite rare that happens, and in most cases this tracking system is actually pretty perfect, and in most cases you're not really going to have any issues and notice the difference between that and any other tracking system. HTC Vive, on the other hand, with it being first generation, still uses the version 1 of HTC's Lighthouse base stations, one of which you can see on the wall behind me there. These work by flooding the room with infrared light. It does sweeps of the room, and then sensors on the device pick up on those synchronization light pulses, and then the sensors determine the headset's location with regards to the tracking sensors, and that's how the HTC Vive and its controllers are tracked. And generally that's fine as long as the base stations are head height and there's nothing impeding the view of the base stations to the headset. They work absolutely flawlessly. However, they're a point of failure. It's something else that could go wrong, and the internet is littered with forum posts of people having connectivity issues with those base stations, but generally I've had no problems with them whatsoever. They've worked flawlessly for me, and like I said at the start, you should just be able to put the headset on and not know what is the tracking system, and that is generally the case. But I would imagine most people, again, just like the connectivity and the setup, would prefer the Rift S because it is all built in and there's nothing separate for you to install or manage. All right, and then we've got the controllers, mate. The controllers on the HTC Vive are getting quite old now. These are the HTC Vive baton style controllers. They're big, they're quite heavy, they're wieldy. They're not very ergonomic, and I absolutely love them. It's probably just because I'm used to them. I've had 3 years of use out of these things. They've got integrated rechargeable batteries which charge over USB, touchpad here, buttons all over it, and generally I just like these. But I imagine that a lot of people probably don't and prefer the Oculus Rift controllers. And speaking of which, we've got the Oculus Touch S controller. This is the updated touch controller. It's small, it's light, it's ergonomic, it oozes dexterity, and I absolutely hate it. I just find them awkward, clumsy, overly sensitive buttons. And also it's got one of the worst design decisions on the entire Rift S on this, and that is it uses a AA battery, and the battery cover is magnetized, and it is far too loose. You can remove it with one finger, which means that when you're in VR and you're swinging this thing around, that battery cover just slips off, which is a ridiculous design decision. That did not need to be magnetized. It could have been just a snap fit clip, like every other battery cover ever in the history of products. But I do concede that the touch controller is a more of an interactive experience. It does allow the user to interact with objects better in VR, so I've read. Everybody that I personally invited in to use my VR has preferred the Vive controller over this for exactly all the reasons that I've just mentioned. The buttons are difficult to find, they're overly sensitive, they're hard to handle in VR, like when you've got the headset on and you're blind and you've got to swap hands. People just prefer this, in my experience. However, from what I've read, people seem to prefer these, which makes no sense to me, but that's just the way it is. However, those are the controllers, Vive and Oculus Rift S. You make your mind up which one you think you'd like the most. Right, next up is audio. The HTC Vive is frankly terrible for audio. This is the deluxe audio strap, which I didn't bother to take off for this video. It comes with a cloth strap instead of this. This is a separate $100 purchase. The default strap that you get with the HTC Vive does not have headphones in it. You do get earbud headphones in the box with the Vive, which plug into a headphone jack within the unit, or you can use your own headphones, but that's just not great at all. This deluxe audio strap comes with quite high quality headphones here. They're so good that they're almost mandatory really, but this is $100. That makes this a $600 device, and that's not good. So out of the box stock, the Vive is useless really for audio. The Rift S, on the other hand, could have been great, and this is another regression of the original Rift. And again, I'm hoping this wasn't Lenovo, because the OG Oculus Rift had audio absolutely nailed. However, this does have integrated audio in the band. It has speakers built in around this area here. It's not over the rear headphones, it's not earbud headphones, it's just almost like little mini speaker drivers in here which project into your ears. However, the audio quality is absolutely tripe. Like the bass, for example, sounds like a child slapping a wet lettuce with a stick. The treble is a single. They just sound like headphones that you get on a long haul flight. They're awful. However, the fact that the Vive doesn't have any headphones built into it makes this better than nothing. So this is the better audio solution than the Vive. And don't get me wrong, the sound might be terrible, but it is usable. It's just not as good as the Rift, and I think that's what's got the gripe for most people. Right, and now for the most important part in the visuals. First generation VR was criticized quite heavily for its quite low resolution visuals, and that's still the case with the HTC Vive. Inside here you've got a panel behind each eye. It's an OLED panel refreshing at 90 Hz with a resolution of 1080 by 1200, and because it's an OLED panel, it has a pentile pixel arrangement, which means that you can see the pixels quite clearly when you've got this up against your face, which is also known as the screen door effect. But because it's an OLED panel, the colors are quite bright, quite crisp. Blacks are very deep, and because it's 90 Hz as well, it's really quite smooth visuals. But that resolution, no amount of software level super sampling or changing the lenses over to Samsung Gear VR lenses makes it any better. It is what it is, but it is usable though. And for second generation VR, they've had the opportunity to increase that resolution, and they have done. Instead of having an OLED panel behind each of the lenses, they've got a single LCD panel spanning both lenses, and it's increased the resolution to 1280 by 1440 per eye, which also eliminates the pentile pixel arrangement, with massively reducing that screen door effect. But the refresh rate of the panel has reduced from 90 Hz down to 80 Hz, and you've also lost the IPD adjuster because it is a single screen. You can't adjust how close the screens are because there's just one screen. So because we went down to LCD, a backlit LCD panel, blacks aren't as black in the Rift S, colours aren't as colourful in the Rift S. However, due to it being LCD and due to that resolution increase, the visuals can't unfortunately show you it on camera, because pointing the lenses at the camera lenses just doesn't work. It is miles better. And yes, you do notice the 80 Hz to 90 Hz dip in refresh rate. The visuals in the HTC Vive are smoother, you do notice that, but the 80 Hz in the Rift S is not uncomfortable at all. It is very usable, but you do notice it. However, given the choice, which I do have, fortunately. I've got the Rift S here and I've got the original Vive. Whenever I go into VR, I choose the Rift S every time, mate, just purely because the visuals are so much crisper, they're so much clearer. I can take the build quality, I can look after it, I can take the audio quality, I can take everything else, I can take the tracking, it's all fine. The visuals of the Rift S make this the choice for me over the HTC Vive every day of the week. Right, one final word on the Rift S before my camera dies. This is not as good as FaceAche could have made it. You see, 5K panels exist. They could have put 5K screens into this. They could have put Bose noise cancelling headphones on the side of it. They could have had higher quality plastics and Alcantara here and leather there. They could have done all of that, but they didn't, because pushing the price of this headset up any further than what it is right now could have been devastating for the PC VR market. They need to keep the cost where it's at whilst iterating on the design of this device to try and keep the market stimulated. You see, a lot of people have already abandoned the PC VR market purely because of the cost of entry. Buying a PC to run this and the VR headset itself is way too much for a lot of people. So increasing the value of the headset again would have just completely killed off any chance of widespread adoption. So no, this is not as good as it could have been, but you know what? I'm all right with that, because if developers start to abandon this platform because it's become a niche, well, that's when FaceAche and HTC start to abandon the PC VR market, and that's when it starts to disintegrate, crash, and then completely die a death entirely. So I want to get behind this. This is a great headset, and it can run on a mid-range PC as well. So I think, although the headsets remain roughly the same price as the first generation Oculus Rift, the PC needed to run this has remained roughly the same as well. And that'll be the case for the next few years. Component prices are going to come down, which means it's going to be easier for people to adopt this moving on into the future. So good on you, FaceAche. Might not have been the best that it could have been, but like I said, I'm all right with that. Right, thanks. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it was useful. For me, out of the two of them, if I was to buy them all over again, the Rift S would be the one that I'd go for. So hope that was helpful. See you in the next one. Doodles.